1997's PlayStation classic Final Fantasy VII is undoubtedly ingrained into gaming culture. A sprawling RPG epic with a sense of scale dwarfed only by its gigantic following and legacy. It's seen additional story content, remakes, and the like, but over 20 years on, just how does this original game hold up? Find out in this review. Before you do, however, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell, leave a like, and all that wonderful stuff. Let's get into it. Final Fantasy VII at its core tells the stories of Cloud, Tifa, and Barret, along with a larger group of eco-terrorists known as Avalanche. Their mission is to take down Shinra, a corporation which is stripping the planet of its life force in order to power machinery, whilst also, just dipping their toes into other sinister dealings, which I can't really get into here, without spoiling the overarching narrative. In super broad strokes, it can be construed as an analogy for respecting indigenous peoples, as well as one's own connection to the planet, the potential of faith, crossing the threshold from man to God, and a whole bunch of other stuff. It really could just as well have worked as a movie or a novel, but telling a few perspectives on this story within a video game was an ambitious move to say the least. There's also something to be said for a narrative which focuses both on unraveling the present as well as balancing that out with showing glimpses of a relatively unknown past. The characters from the start of the game and even later down the line are all interesting to follow, and the game has a good balance of quiet moments between gameplay which help to establish their personalities, connections, and backstories well. You're always growing more powerful, but seeing glimpses of the enemy's capabilities always keeps this whole uprising thing just feeling almost futile. It also utilizes the medium of gaming effectively, making you control a morally corrupt sequence of actions at one point that feels particularly moving. It's a big spoiler, but if you know, you know. By making you do this, the game invites you into the protagonist's internal dilemma and makes you sit with that disturbing confusion. The game also takes a lot of stuff that would usually be conveyed through, cutscenes, and in some way will let the player control it. Escapes from enemy bases, chase sequences and such are all regularly turned into mini-games. The quality of these is all over the place, sure, but the effort in creating these mini-games and then stitching them into the narrative of the game, that doesn't go unnoticed. When it does use cutscenes, however, they're pretty good. There's no voice acting or anything, but they use the camera angles effectively, and they clearly had a lot of time put into them. They're of their time, which can be seen with certain models here, but it's fine. What isn't fine is the wildly inconsistent presentation of these cutscenes. Some are in letterbox ratio, some have awful compression, others have a barely functional frame rate, and honestly, it kills immersion so much at some points. This is made even more upsetting by the fact that somebody clearly had a solid vision for these cutscenes, but the format that they were put in just didn't allow that vision to be realized or conveyed. This could just be because I played the Switch port, but let me know in the comments if any of you guys noticed this as well. The game's pacing also struggles a little due to the amount of exposition that needs to be delivered here. Long sections of flashbacks abound at certain points. The case could be made that this fumbles the balance between narrative and gameplay, but even if it does, hey, it's still enjoyable at the end of the day. As an RPG, the place where you'll be spending a large portion of your time is engaged in battles with enemies. These come via story events as well as random encounters, and despite a few gripes, they're actually handled pretty well. The models all look really good here, all the battle themes including the standard one are just fucking bangers, and mechanically, they're a blast. The time and limit meters are the main aspects of the battles here, and as a Final Fantasy newbie, I found them to be really engaging mechanics. The time limit mechanic sets these battles between real-time and turn-based. Unless your limit is charged, you have to wait your turn to attack, and the limit meter is charged by taking damage. Once you take enough damage, you can use these really cool character-specific moves that have a wide variety of effects. In a way, taking and dealing damage can actually really help or hinder you as a result of this meter. Additionally, if your limit is charged, then your time meter will refill incredibly fast, and you can use standard attacks more often if you keep it that way. It also stores its charge between successive battles, so you can charge it up until you really need it for some kind of particular circumstance. Something crazy I only actually discovered in the last leg of the game is there's actually a whole bunch of these limit break moves to unlock apart from the standard 2 per character, which I just blindly assumed was the quota. It's not. You have to go into a menu and manually change the limit level to the one that you want to unlock or use moves from. I wish the game had told me this somewhere, because if I was playing it again, yeah, I'd absolutely take advantage of this feature. There's also another element here known as materia. Basically, they're these magical rocks that you find that grant various buffs and debuffs to your characters in exchange for new abilities. If you have equipment with slots in, then you can ice yourself out with these things and they'll just let you do all sorts of crazy shit. You can also level up these materia to get new abilities by taking them into battle with you. Some of the equipment you choose has no slots for materia, but superior stats. Some has double experience points to all materia you assign it, and pretty much everything in between those two extremes is on display here. Selecting equipment, materia, and whatnot is itself a sort of metagame. You can also chain materia together if the slots are connected and give it amplified effects. Like, if you wanted a move that heals your whole party, you just combine a restore materia and an all materia and boom, there you go. You also have these materia that summon an all-powerful being, usually yoinked from real-life mythology, to do this really intense move. Some of these can even cause instant death, but you can't use them in most boss battles and such for, yeah, obvious reasons. They're cool to watch the first time, but they do have really just long cutscenes that get obnoxious after the 5th time, and no, you can't skip them. And that brings me to another issue with the pacing of battles in general. Sometimes they run way too slow. To counter this, the port that I played on Switch has a triple speed feature you can trigger anywhere except cutscenes that makes things run at a far more modern pace. I appreciate this, but it can be ridiculous how slowly certain sequences will play out without it. Regardless, this was a godsend for grinding, especially until it decided to crash on me. This sent me down the rabbit hole of the internet, where I found out that this is actually a really common bug, and that put me off using this feature most of the time. Especially because the game operates predominantly via save points, and they can be decently spread out at times. The save point system works, but it frustrates me that they didn't just retroactively include a restore point system for this port, because this would have been a really easy addition, especially considering that this is just straight emulation. But back to battles, there's also a system that lets you use items. These can cure statuses, inflict damage and such, but unfortunately, even with the sorting feature, these can still be overwhelming to navigate during the heat of battle. Think Pokemon Red and Blue's overworld backpack, but during a partially time-based battle context. Not fun. Also, remember how I said that this game is the story of Cloud, Tifa, and Barret? Well, yeah, that's true, but there's also a lot of other characters that join you along the way. This stressed me out for a time because I didn't know which characters I should be using in my 3-person party. Beyond limit breaks and stats, however, they're basically all just templates with personalities, hopes, dreams, and the usual stuff, which I found relieving. It's also relieving that even when they're not in your party, characters will still gain half the experience they would have in any given battle. This is especially helpful when you consider that the story of this game will sometimes take certain characters away and force you to use certain combinations of the characters for extended periods of time. That definitely helps make this less jarring. Another sizable chunk of time here will be spent exploring towns and dungeons. To someone born in the 2000s, the way they handled these was endlessly fascinating. Rather than rendering these surprisingly expansive areas as 3D models, they use flat images of the environments and then layer in behaviors so that you move around them believably. These are gorgeously drawn, and it's actually easy to be fooled into thinking they are more expansive than they really are due to this deceptive but really cool sense of scale. The camera angles in these are obviously fixed, but to their credit, they're at times surprisingly cinematic. For example, a canted angle highlights the cramped nature of a hallway you're going through. It kind of feels like playing through a cutscene, and that's really cool. Unfortunately, these areas can be really hard to navigate at times. There is a feature where you press the minus button to highlight entrances and exits, but even so, it's still somewhat confusing. And on that note, the graphics as a whole in this game have not aged gracefully, like, at all. The ambition is here, but that still doesn't mean it hasn't aged just atrociously in the visual department. But again, the gameplay doesn't suffer too much for this. The dungeons in particular are fun and not overly confusing to navigate, and they even include some admittedly basic but satisfying puzzle elements. Possibly the most ambitious aspect of this game is its ahead of its time open world. While it does feature miniatures of the town, natural structures and such until you walk up to them and enter them, it's still incredible to navigate. This is made even better by being able to save at any time in this overworld, as well as acquiring several vehicles which make transport easier as you move throughout the story. It does have its share of flaws though. The low-res, transparent world map that doesn't have town names marked is, it's a big one. It makes just going where you need to go needlessly confusing, but worse than this is the lack of information that they give you on where you need to go next. A notable amount of the time, it's hidden behind some really cryptic piece of dialogue that doesn't actually tell you anything, and you just gotta resort to a guide to even decode it. This definitely hampers your progression at times. Every element of the game I've discussed so far has its fair share of strengths and weaknesses. The exception here is the soundtrack, because this thing just goes from strength to super strength. From the instant you enter the game, it conveys such a wide range of emotions that feel perfectly tailored to every event you encounter. To me, this soundtrack deserves to sit in some kind of Hall of Fame somewhere. It's really just that good. And with that, I've covered just about everything here, bar spoilers. But on the whole, what did I think of Final Fantasy VII? Well, Final Fantasy VII is a sprawling epic. That much is true. Unfortunately, the same massive scale and ahead of its time ambition which make it so special are also what hold it back the most at times. Regardless of this, its solid gameplay, entrancing narrative, and serviceable presentation more than make up for that. I'd give this game a 6.5 out of 10, and yes, I can already feel the internet's executioner's switch being thrown on me as I say that, but it's just my opinion. If you agree, leave a like. If you disagree, please leave a like too. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell, as well as commenting what you thought of both Final Fantasy VII and my review of it. I hope you all just have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.